The rift tore open not with a bang, but with the sound of a record scratch. One moment, Deadpool was mid-swing, katanas clashing against alien chitin in a splatter of neon blood, a quip about gastrointestinal distress on his lips. The next, the fabric of his reality peeled back like cheap wallpaper, and he was falling through a kaleidoscope of silent, screaming faces he didn't recognize. He landed, not with a superheroic three-point stance, but like a sack of wet meat and regenerating organs, cratering the roof of a compact car in a City Z parking lot. Smoke plumed, alarms wailed, a different kind of chaos greeted him. Not the chaotic funhouse of his home universe, but a practiced, institutional chaos. A giant humanoid cabbage with razor-sharp leaves and a face of pure spite, a C-class monster dubbed the Cabbage King by the Hero Association database, was methodically shredding a department store. The air smelled of ozone, dust, and fear, a simple, honest smell. No cosmic weirdness, just straightforward urban terror. Deadpool pushed himself up, bones snapping back into place with audible clicks. He saw the monster. He saw the fleeing civilians, their faces etched with a specific mundane terror he recognized from news channels. A setup, a punchline waiting to happen. "All right, let us pray," he yelled, blades flashing. He charged, a red and black streak of controlled insanity. "Don't go Romaine calm. This'll be a slaughter." He moved with brutal, efficient grace, a dancer in an abattoir. The Cabbage King roared, lashing out with vine whips. Deadpool dodged, spun, and severed a limb. "Leave me alone." Green sap, thick as glue, sprayed across his mask. He carved a path through the vegetable minions sprouting from the ground, smaller, shrieking Brussels sprouts with tiny needle teeth. Ah, it brought its kiddos. Family dinner is canceled. But something was wrong. The few C-class heroes on the perimeter, heroes with names like Armor Fist and Girder Man, who were adept at holding back rubble and directing crowds, didn't cheer. They stared, their expressions not of relief, but of profound confusion and a dawning horror. A woman clutching a child didn't weep with gratitude. She flinched at the wet, hacking sounds of his swords and the grotesque splatter of vegetable matter. Deadpool finished the main monster with a theatrical flourish, plunging a blade into its core. "Time to make coleslaw," he crowed. The king dissolved into a pile of fetid, steaming vegetation. He stood atop the corpse, struck a pose, hands on hips, one foot planted on the rotting central stalk, and awaited the applause. It didn't come. Only the relentless cry of sirens, the low murmur of official voices on radios, and the uncomfortable shuffling of feet. The silence was heavier than any monster. "Tough crowd," he muttered, wiping sap off his lens. "What, you only laugh for guys in capes? I've got pouches. That's like 90% of a costume. The other 10% is emotional damage and poor life choices." A Hero Association drone, a sleek white orb with a single red sensor eye, zipped down, scanning him with a cold blue light that felt intrusive, clinical. An official in a crisp gray suit arrived, clipboard in hand, flanked by two B-class heroes in matching utilitarian armor. The official, a man with a face like a closed filing cabinet, didn't look at the monster's remains, but directly at Deadpool. His eyes held no awe, no amusement, not even the familiar annoyance at the antics of costumed weirdos. They held the cold, assessing look of a bureaucrat, cataloging a new and troubling form of paperwork that had just bled on his desk. "Identify yourself," the official said, his voice devoid of inflection. State your power classification and intent. Deadpool leaned in, the scent of cabbage and cordite wafting from him. I'm the Merc with the mouth, baby. The regenerating degenerate. Okay, we'll workshop the title. Intent? To spread joy, mayhem, and timely quips, often simultaneously. My power is regenerative immortality, fourth wall awareness, and a stunning vulnerability to emotional neglect. Also, katanas and guns, lots of guns, classified as sexy threat, or if you're stuffy, mutant nuisance class. The official didn't blink. He simply wrote something down. Unregistered, unpredictable, vocalizations non sequitur and potentially psychologically disruptive. Brutality observed is excessive, gratuitous, but effective. He looked past Deadpool to the civilians being ushered away by uniformed disaster responders. They weren't looking at their savior. Their eyes were glued to the gory, pulpy mess of the monster, to the chunks of green matter clinging to storefronts, to the red-suited figure now covered in vegetable viscera. They saw the mess, not the mercy. Containment and debrief protocol suggested, the official stated, nodding to the two B-class heroes. They stepped forward, their postures rigid, hands resting on energy batons at their belts. They looked like security guards approaching a volatile, possibly rabid animal. The joke, Deadpool realized with a cold drip of unease that had nothing to do with his healing factor, wasn't funny here. The humor was a splash of bright, garish color on a grayscale world of efficiency, classification, and clear hierarchies. And it just looked like a stain, a chaotic, confusing, unsanitary stain. The Hero Association drone beeped sharply, locking its scan. It floated closer to the official. On the man's tablet, the biometric and energy readout data stream coalesced into a single flashing word in stark authoritarian red. Anomaly. The official's lips thinned. Anomaly confirmed. Unknown energy signature. Biological readings inconsistent. Extreme cellular regeneration amidst catastrophic, continuous trauma. Psychological profile, non-linear. He looked up. You will come with us for evaluation. Compliance is advised. Deadpool's head tilted. Evaluation? Is that like a review? Wade Wilson solves monster problems promptly, but talks too much and leaves a biohazard. 3 out of 5 stars. Or is this more of a strip down to your morally ambiguous birthday suit and get poked with probes kind of party? This is not a negotiation, said one of the B-class heroes, his voice modulated by his helmet. The Hero Association maintains order. Unregistered powers are a threat to that order. Order? Deadpool laughed, a sound that seemed to startle a pigeon on a nearby lamppost. You guys just got done with a giant angry cabbage. My last Tuesday involved a telepathic squid and a stolen time machine. Your order needs a little paprika, my dudes. He took a step back, not out of fear, but to get a better vantage point. The city around him was clean, almost sterile in its reconstruction, clearly a place used to monster attacks and swift, impersonal cleanup. The people moved with a shell-shocked efficiency. This wasn't a world for quipping mercenaries. It was a world for heroes and civilians, with a thick, invisible line between them. He was a smudge on that line. You know, I think I've overstayed my welcome, Deadpool said, sheathing a katana with an exaggerated sigh. The vibe here is very tax audit meets apocalypse. I'm more of a karaoke night meets war crime kind of guy. Different circles. You are not permitted to leave, the official stated, nodding again. The two B-class heroes activated their batons, which hummed with a contained yellow energy. The drone's sensor glowed brighter, and a thin, nearly invisible laser grid began to paint the ground around Deadpool, a containment field initializing. Deadpool's mind, a three-ring circus of pop culture references, violent impulses, and startling moments of clarity, processed the scene. This wasn't S.H.I.E.L.D. trying to recruit or exploit him. This wasn't the X-Men reluctantly tolerating him. This was a system that saw his very existence, his chaotic, messy, funny violence, as a glitch, an anomaly to be corrected, filed, or deleted. The cold drip of unease turned into a familiar, warming flood of manic energy. If they wanted a glitch, he'd give them a glitch. Permission to be awesome is never granted, suit and tie. It's taken. In a flash of motion too fluid for his bulky suit, he drew both pistols, firing not at the heroes, but at the drone and the pavement near the official's feet. The shots were percussive, shocking in the institutional quiet. The drone sparked and veered away. The official stumbled back, his clipboard clattering to the ground. The B-class heroes surged forward. Deadpool met them not with deadly force, but with absurdity. He ducked under a baton swing, kicked the back of one hero's knee, Neasy does it, and used the other's momentum to spin him into a nearby fire hydrant, which he shot. A geyser of water erupted, adding to the chaotic soup of cabbage guts and debris. See? Now it's a splash zone. More fun for everyone. He backflipped, a move he insisted was cool despite the soggy, squelching sound it produced, onto the roof of the ruined compact car. He was a spectacle, a prank in a world that had no sense of humor. But the system was fast. More drones were converging. In the distance, he could see the sleek, unmistakable silhouette of an A-class hero, someone with real power, streaking toward the disturbance. This wasn't a fight he could win through regeneration and quips alone. This was a world that could bury him in bureaucracy and power levels he couldn't yet comprehend. He needed an exit, a new punchline. His eye caught a flicker of movement in an alleyway. Not a hero, not a civilian. A figure in a dark green jumpsuit with a shock of blonde hair, staring at him from the shadows with an expression not of fear or disapproval, but of intense, analytical curiosity. The figure held a small device that was pointed directly at him, its screen flickering with data. A rogue element, a potential plot device. Well, well, Deadpool muttered to himself, a grin spreading beneath his mask. Looks like the spin-off series might have a love interest, or a frenemy, or a morally ambiguous tech support guy. The contract's still fuzzy. With one last exaggerated bow to the advancing A-class hero, now landing with a ground-shaking thud. A stern-looking man in a sleek silver and black suit crackling with electricity, Deadpool threw a smoke pellet, filled with glitter because principles. Au revoir, monsieur. Try the veal, or, the coleslaw. As the glittering smoke cloud enveloped him, he dove for the alleyway, not toward the blonde figure, but past him, a red and black phantom. You, jumpsuit. You look like you know where a guy can get a decent taco and some existential exposition. Lead the way or I start narrating your internal monologue, and trust me, it's boring in there. He disappeared into the labyrinth of City Z. Not just a physical anomaly, but a narrative one. A burst of meta-chaos in a deadly, serious world. The official picked up his clipboard, brushing off glitter and cabbage bits. On the tablet, under Anomaly, new text scrolled. Status at large. Threat profile. Erratic. Recommendation. Elevate to S-class surveillance priority. Coordinate with tattletale for psychological prediction models. The A-class hero, Lightning Max, dispersed the smoke with a crackle of his hands, his face a mask of stern disapproval. The mess was immense. The cause was gone. And somewhere in the city, an uncontainable variable was now loose, looking for tacos and trouble in equal measure, about to crash headlong into a story that had no idea what to do with him. The curtain had risen on a new act. The audience was confused. And the star was already breaking the fourth wall to complain about the lack of a craft services table. The interrogation room was a masterpiece of psychological sterility. It wasn't a dark, dank basement cell. It was a clean, white, sound-absorbing cube. The walls were a seamless, featureless mat, absorbing light and sound until the very air felt muted. No two-way mirror, just a smooth, blank wall that seemed to swallow his existence. They clearly understood his regenerative capabilities. The single chair was a heavy, sculpted polymer, bolted directly to the floor. He wasn't restrained by cuffs or straps. The message was clear. Trying to leave would be pointless, not due to physical strength, but due to the overwhelming, systematic, and impersonal response that would follow. It was a cage of inevitability. Two association officials sat across from him at a simple table of the same white material. A man and a woman, their features sharp, their expressions blank. They looked like humanoid filing cabinets. State your designation and the nature of the spatial anomaly that facilitated your ingress, the woman began, her voice as neutral as a text-to-speech program. Well, Doris, can I call you Doris? You look like a Doris. It was your classic, accidental, multiversal incursion. Probably a science experiment gone wrong, or a bored cosmic entity with a subscription to my OnlyFans. Lots of swirling colors, existential dread, the screams of alternate MEs being unmade, standard commute stuff, very cinematic, lots of lens flare. Do you represent a direct or indirect existential threat to the stability of this reality's baryonic matter and causal timeline? The man asked, his eyes on a datapad. Only to its fashion sense. And maybe it's sanctimony. You guys are wound tighter than a... Your persistent use of non-sequitur humor and referential dialogue is a noted psychological tactic. The woman interrupted, not looking up from her own screen. A small hologram projected from it, showing a simplified, disturbingly accurate psych profile. We assess it as a deflection and coping mechanism, likely stemming from profound physical and psychological trauma, severe body dysmorphia, and a fractured, possibly non-linear perception of subjective reality. We are not interested in the mechanism. We are interested in quantifiable threat level and dimensional origin point. Deadpool's grin, hidden behind the mask, didn't fade so much as it calcified. They hadn't just ignored the joke, they'd run a full diagnostic on the laugh track, identified its source as childhood trauma, and filed it under anomalous noise. They dissected him in minutes, not with malice, but with the clinical detachment of entomologists pinning a bizarre beetle to a board. The armor of his antics wasn't just being shrugged off, it was being transparent to their scanners, leaving his raw, messy humanity completely exposed and already categorized. It was the most violating thing he'd ever experienced, and they'd done it without raising their voices. "You're no fun," he said, the usual sing-song tone flat. "Fun is not an operational parameter," the man replied. The testing chamber was a vast, brutalist concrete gymnasium, a hollowed-out cube the size of an aircraft hangar. The air smelled of ozone and old dust. Waiting for him in the center was Genos, the demon cyborg. His polished gold and white chassis gleamed under the stark overhead lights, his core humming with a low, potent thrum of contained plasma. His optical sensors glowed with a cold blue light, scanning Deadpool from head to toe without a hint of animosity or curiosity. Pure analysis. I am Genos, the demon cyborg, S-Class, rank 14. I have been tasked by the Hero Association with evaluating your physical combat capabilities and durability, Genos stated, his voice a smooth, synthetic baritone. He assumed a textbook battle stance, one palm open and glowing faintly. Please demonstrate your maximum offensive potential. Do not hold back. Ooh, a shiny Tin Man. Let's see if you've got a heart under all that chrome, or at least a funny bone. Deadpool drew his katanas with a metallic shing. Don't worry, I'll just give you a little polish. A superficial scratch. Your attempts at verbal provocation are noted but irrelevant to the data set, Genos said. The fight began not with a roar, but with a calculated beep from Genos' systems. Deadpool was a typhoon of chaos. He moved with the fluid, unpredictable grace of a lifelong dancer in the ballet of violence, blending breakdancing with Krav Maga, capoeira with straight-up barroom brawling. He was a master of a dozen martial arts, all fused into a single, gloriously incoherent style. Kill Fu. Genos was a precision instrument, a supercomputer with incinerating fists. For every 3 strikes, Deadpool landed, sparks flying as his carbonadium blades scraped against the cyborg's reinforced alloy. Genos calculated 1. And that one was devastating. A blinding flash of orange, a searing beam of plasma, precisely calibrated, lanced out and vaporized Deadpool's legs from the knees down. Deadpool hit the concrete with a wet thud, his lower limbs ending in blackened, sizzling stumps. He let out a cackle that echoed in the vast space. Ha ha ha! Okay, Stumpy mode activated. Always wanted to try the half-height champion's strategy. The officials watched from a shielded observation balcony high above, murmuring into recorders. Subject displays extreme pain tolerance. Vocalizations continue despite catastrophic injury. On the floor, the flesh began to bubble and regrow. It wasn't a clean, magical process. It was visceral and grotesque. Muscle fibers, wet and pink, snaked out like eager worms. Bone extended from the charred ends with a series of audible, crunching pops. Nerves webbed outward, sizzling with reconnection. Within 60 seconds, he was standing again, swaying slightly on newborn pink feet. He cracked his neck. Round 2, Toaster. Let's see your warranty. Genos did not react with shock, horror, or even mild interest. His sensors recorded everything. Thermal bloom of regeneration, cellular metabolic rate, energy expenditure. Rapid cellular regeneration via an unidentified metastem cell catalyst. Process is not unique. Observed in high-tier regenerative monster types, such as elder centipede variants. The subject's pain receptors appear to remain fully active throughout, a biologically inefficient and questionable evolutionary trait likely contributing to psychological degradation. He powered up his other arm, the machinery whirring. Continued stress testing is required to locate a structural or systemic weakness, initiating Phase 2. The next 20 minutes were a symphony of destruction and reconstruction. Deadpool was dismembered. I'm giving you a hand. Well, an arm. Incinerated torso up. Feelin' toasty. Pierced through the skull with a focused beam. Think fast. Oh, too late. Each time he came back, the quips growing louder, more frantic, more layered with pop culture references that died in the sterile air. Come on, Buckethead, give me something. A smile, a grimace, a disapproving headshake. React. Call me a menace, a clown, a degenerate, anything. Genos' face remained a placid mask of focused study. He wasn't fighting an opponent. He was stress testing an anomalous piece of equipment. Regeneration velocity remains constant. No observed energy depletion. Quotient of verbal nonsense increases linearly with physical trauma, suggesting a direct cognitive link. The officials above made notes. Regenerative capacity places him in high durability bracket, but tactical and strategic thinking appears subpar, reliant on chaos. Primary threat is not power, but unpredictability and apparent invulnerability to conventional termination. Classification proposal, Zombie Man variant, but with significantly higher neurotic output. Finally, after reducing Deadpool to a twitching, regenerating torso for the 5th time, Genos powered down. He looked up at the observation balcony. Evaluation complete. Maximum offensive potential is moderate, reliant on close quarters melee and standard ballistic weapons. Defensive potential is functionally limitless against purely physical and thermal damage, up to my 70% output level. Psychological resilience is impossible to quantify with current metrics. Suggested countermeasures: containment, psychological warfare, or complete molecular disintegration via specific S-class abilities. Deadpool, now whole again, sat up, panting. He was drenched in sweat, blood, and the smell of his own cooked flesh. He looked at Genos, who was already turning to leave, his task complete. That's it? No good fight? No, you're weird? Not even a please never do that again? Genos paused, glancing back. It was an adequate data-gathering exercise. Thank you for your cooperation. He walked away, his footsteps echoing in the hollow chamber. Deadpool was left alone in the center of the concrete vastness, the silence pressing in on him heavier than any of Genos' blasts. He felt unused, like a toy that had been played with until its batteries were drained, then discarded without a second thought. The holding cell was another minimalist space, a transparent, reinforced polymer wall, a cot, a toilet. No bars, just the clear, unbreakable barrier. He could see the empty, white hallway outside. He heard the murmur of voices. 2 low-ranking C-class heroes, looking tired and bored, were walking a patrol route, stopping just out of his direct line of sight. Complete mess. They're still cleaning cabbage guts off the main street, one said, a guy with slightly enlarged forearms. The anomaly did that? The other, a woman who could make her hair prehensile, asked. Yeah, brutal. But effective, I guess. They've got him in here now. They're bringing in an S-class to consult on the phenomenon. Which one? Metal Knight? He loves weird tech. No, they said the one who's always nearby. You know, the one who lives in City Z. A flicker of movement at the far end of the hallway. A figure ambled past the intersection, moving with a slow, utterly mundane gait. Bald, wearing a cheap, yolk-yellow jumpsuit with a zipper down the front. One hand held a reusable grocery bag that appeared to contain celery, instant noodles, and a few cans of something. He glanced sideways into the cell block. His eyes, round, placid, utterly devoid of intensity, passed over Deadpool's cell. They met Deadpool's own frantic, searching gaze for a millisecond. There was no recognition, no curiosity, no threat assessment, no pity. Not even the clinical interest of the officials or Genos. It was the look a man gives a vaguely interesting stain on the wall. a piece of furniture that's always been there, a complete and total nullification of presence. Then he was gone, around the corner, the sound of his cheap sneakers squeaking faintly on the polished floor. Deadpool launched himself at the clear wall, pressing against it. Hey, you! Caped Baldy, yellow jumpsuit, grocery guy, I see you. Come back. Let's talk. Do you know who I am? Do you know what I am? Only the echo of his own voice, strained and suddenly desperate, answered him. The two C-class heroes peered around the corner, looking at him with confusion, then moved on, whispering. Deadpool slid down the wall to the floor. The silence in the White Room was absolute, but for the first time, the silence inside his head, the space usually filled with a riot of commentary, movie quotes, and internal banter, was louder. It was a yawning, empty static. They didn't fear him. They didn't hate him. They didn't even find him annoying in a memorable way. To the system, he was a file. To the cyborg, he was data. To the strongest man who had just passed by, he was less than background noise. He was a joke told in a language no one here spoke, and in the echoing quiet of his own mind, he couldn't even remember the punchline. Cliffhanger. The door to the cell block hissed open, not the bald man returning. It was the female official from the interrogation, accompanied by 4 heavily armored, non-powered containment specialists carrying bulky, humming equipment that glowed with a sickly green light. She looked down at him, her datapad in hand. The consultation is complete. The S-class opinion has been logged. Your anomaly status is confirmed. Effective immediately, you are being transferred to a specialized containment facility for indefinite study and neutralization of your dimensional signature. She gestured with a flick of her wrist. The specialists raised their devices, which emitted a low thrum that made Deadpool's teeth ache and his healing factor flare in confusion. The proposed method, she said, her voice still perfectly calm, is dimensional anchoring and causal erasure. You will not be harmed. You will simply be unmade. From this reality's point of origin, please do not resist. It would only complicate the paperwork. Deadpool looked from the cold, humming devices to the official's impassive face. Unmade, not killed, erased. He'd faced death a million times. This was different. This was the universe hitting the backspace key. And the only person who had looked at him without seeing a threat, a file, or a joke had just walked away carrying his groceries. They released him, not out of mercy, not due to exonerating evidence, but because of cold, pragmatic calculus. The alarms that shrieked through the Hero Association's sterile halls weren't for intruders. They were the citywide dragon-level threat sirens, a sound that turned the blood of even seasoned A-class heroes to ice. A gargantuan, self-replicating gelatinous horror, designated the Consensus, had emerged in City J. It wasn't just a monster, it was a phenomenon, flooding the streets, dissolving structures and matter, absorbing and copying any biological or mechanical pattern it touched, growing exponentially. Standard protocols were failing. The cost-benefit analysis on the association's internal servers updated in real time. Containment of anomaly? Subject, Merc with mouth. Projected resource drain, high. Utility of anomaly versus dragon-level threat. Potential net positive. Directive, redirect. The official who had spoken of erasure now stood before his cell. The humming devices powered down. A tactical reassignment has been issued. You will be transported to the City J perimeter. You are to engage the threat designated the Consensus. Your continued cooperation will be noted for future review. Deadpool, who had been drawing a detailed, anatomically correct mural of the official being eaten by a unicorn on the cell wall with a secreted piece of carbon, paused. So what? I'm a biological hazmat suit now? A canary in a sentient jello mine? Do I get hazard pay? A little thank you for not being erased fruit basket? You get to continue existing in this reality, the official said, her voice devoid of any irony. It was a simple statement of fact. He was a tool, and a tool was being taken out of the box. City J was not a battlefield. It was a digestion. The sky was stained a sickly, translucent amber, the light filtering through the enormous, pulsing body of the consensus that loomed over the central district like a cancerous, breathing mountain. The air reeked of ozone and a cloying, sweet smell that masked the underlying stench of dissolved concrete, steel, and flesh. The streets weren't flooded with water, but with a viscous, acidic gel that flowed with a mind of its own, splitting off smaller, humanoid-sized blobs that swarmed with silent, terrifying purpose. Heroes on the perimeter, a mix of B and A class, fought a desperate, losing battle of attrition. Energy blasts seared through gel, only for it to reform. Physical strikes were absorbed. The consensus learned, adapted, copied fighting styles from the heroes it engulfed. It was a war against a thinking, feeling tide. Deadpool was dropped at the edge of the amber zone like a parcel. He took a deep, dramatic breath of the toxic air. Ladies, germs, and gender-neutral gelatinous cubes. The party's arrived. He waded into the flowing muck with a gleeful whoop, katanas drawn. Who ordered the jello shot from hell? Extra vomit flavor? For a moment, he was a maestro of carnage. He was a whirlwind of silver and crimson, slicing blobs into quivering chunks, severing pseudopods, dancing through showers of acidic spray that sizzled on his suit and skin. It's like fighting a giant angry dessert. Does it come with sprinkles? A cherry on top? But the victory was empty. For every blob he dismembered, 2 more would pull themselves from the main mass or reform from the puddles he created. He was a man trying to empty the ocean with a teaspoon, if the teaspoon was also screaming puns. He was engulfed. A wave of amber gel, deceptively fast, rose and swallowed him whole. The world became a burning, suffocating pressure. He felt his suit dissolve, then his skin, then his muscles. He was being broken down into constituent proteins and minerals, absorbed into the hive mind. He could feel a faint, terrifying consciousness, not malevolent, not even hungry, just assimilating. From outside, the heroes saw the red and black figure vanish into the amber, a brief, violent bubbling, and then nothing. Inside the acid, down to his cracking, dissolving skeleton, his laughter bubbled through the gel, a stream of carbon dioxide and insane defiance, to taste like chicken and regret. Then, a violent, pulsing regeneration. Flesh exploded outward from bone, organs knitting, skin weaving itself over the burning nerves. He burst from the side of the massive blob in a shower of gore, half-formed gel and shiny new pink skin, landing in a crouch on a crumbling car roof. He was naked except for his mask, which had somehow, impossibly regenerated with him. "Encore!" he screamed at the pulsing mountain. "I didn't hear any applause. Was my performance too acidic?" He did it again and again, a dozen deaths in an hour, each more creatively horrific than the last, crushed by a solidified gel fist, digestively dissolved. Suffocated inside a lung-like sac, the creature formed to test oxygen processing. He was a spectacle of perpetual perishing. And the world ignored him. The A-class heroes, Lightning Max, Spring Mustachio, others he didn't know, struggled with grim, silent desperation to hold a collapsing perimeter, to shepherd fleeing civilians down the last clear avenues. At first, they'd glanced at the regenerating madman with a mixture of horror and a faint, desperate hope. But as he died his 7th, 8th, 9th death, their glances stopped. He was not a weapon. He was a statistical event, a recurring, noisy, and ultimately irrelevant anomaly. The monsters, mindless as they were, learned too. After his 5th regeneration, the smaller blobs simply ceased to orient toward him. They flowed around him, ignoring his slashing blades as they would ignore a buzzing gnat, focusing entirely on the heroes who could be permanently harmed, the structures that could be permanently taken. He was background noise, a persistent, self-correcting glitch in the system that had no bearing on the overall program. He saw Lightning Max, the stern A-class hero from his first day, truly fight. Not with the cold precision of Genos, but with raw, human grit. Max's sleek suit was torn, his lightning aura sputtering like a dying neon sign. He stood his ground before a collapsed apartment entrance, a dozen civilians cowering behind him as a wave of smaller blobs, now shaped into crude, sharp-edged tools from absorbed metal, advanced. Max fought until his body gave out, taking down 3 blobs before a 4th slammed into him, crushing him against a wall. He slid down, bleeding from a dozen wounds, his energy depleted. A final, smaller blob oozing toward his head. Deadpool was there in an instant. He didn't quip. He simply shredded the blob with a violence so utter it turned the creature into a fine, harmless mist. He stood over Max, the acidic gel sizzling at his bare feet. He offered a bloody hand. "No need to thank me. Just doing my neighborly duty. Also, your outfit is very tight. Not a criticism, just an observation, form-fitting. Lets the people know you mean business." Max coughed, a trickle of blood at his lip. He didn't look at the offered hand. His eyes, glassy with pain and exhaustion, scanned the ruined skyline, searching the amber-stained clouds. "Where is he?" he rasped. The words barely audible over the din of collapsing buildings and distant hero blasts. "Where is Saitama? This is a dragon level. He should be here by now. He has to be." Deadpool's hand hung in the air, the gratitude, the recognition, the moment. It wasn't for him. It was directed at an absent god, a promised solution. Deadpool was just a temporary, noisy plug in a dam that was waiting for the real, permanent engineer to show up and pour concrete. He was a placeholder, an interim measure, a symptom of the problem, not the cure. He let his hand fall. Max's comrades rushed in, hauling their leader to safety, not even acknowledging the naked, scarred man standing amid the acid. He was part of the landscape, a bizarre, regenerative piece of rubble. He stood alone in the dissolving heart of the city. The consensus pulsed, unconcerned. The heroes fought on, unseeing. The civilians had been evacuated from this sector. He was surrounded by creatures that no longer feared him, allies who didn't see him, and a victory condition, saving the day being the hero that he was fundamentally incapable of fulfilling. In his world, his immortality was the ultimate power, the thing that let him outlast, outgun, out-insult any foe. Here it was a party trick at a funeral, a curse of perpetual, meaningless presence in a world where presence, without the specific, overwhelming power to end things, meant absolutely nothing. He could be here forever, dying and coming back, and it would change nothing. The psychological cracks weren't just showing, they were widening into canyons of existential dread. What was the Merc with the mouth, if not even his endless, spectacular death was notable? He looked down at his own hands, watched a drop of the consensus's acid burn a hole in his palm, the flesh closing over it before his eyes. "I'm a ghost," he muttered to no one. A really loud, obnoxious ghost that nobody's afraid of anymore. Cliffhanger. It happened without fanfare. A shockwave, but unlike any he'd ever felt. It was silent, clean, and utterly final. It wasn't a blast of heat or concussive force. It was a wave of pure applied pressure that passed through the district like a sigh from a god. There was no sound of explosion, just a sudden universal pop of displaced air. Every single monster, every pulsing blob of the consensus, from the mountain-sized core to the smallest droplet oozing in a gutter, simultaneously vaporized into a fine, harmless amber mist. The acidic gel flooding the streets instantly became inert, sticky water. The sickly light vanished, replaced by the ordinary, polluted twilight of a battered city. The fight, the immense, desperate, dragon-level battle, was simply over. On the rooftop of a half-dissolved office building, a figure lowered his fist. He was bald, clad in a cheap white cape and a yellow jumpsuit. He hadn't leapt dramatically into the fray. He hadn't charged up a mighty blow. He had simply arrived, bored, and punched the problem once. Saitama scratched his head, looking vaguely put out, as if he'd been interrupted on his way to a sale. He surveyed the ruined district with an expression of mild inconvenience, his gaze sweeping over the stunned surviving heroes, the wreckage, the clouds of settling mist. His eyes passed directly over the figure of Deadpool, standing naked and alone in the center of the street, coated in gelatinous residue and his own dried blood. There was no flicker of recognition, no assessment of the strange, scarred man who shouldn't be alive. It wasn't a dismissal, it was something far worse, a complete lack of registration. To the man who had just ended a city-ending threat with a single bored punch, Deadpool was as noteworthy as a slightly discolored patch of asphalt. Saitama yawned, turned, and with a casual hop, disappeared from the rooftop, off to find a supermarket that might still be open. Deadpool stood frozen in the sudden, ringing silence. The ultimate punchline had been delivered, and he hadn't even been in the audience. He was a speck on the stage after the main act had left the building. The final, crushing truth settled into his bones, colder than any regeneration. In a world of absolute power, absolute immortality was just a thing that happened, and no one was watching. The world had become a silent film after the orchestra had walked out. The frantic, desperate chaos of City J was gone, replaced by the low, organized hum of recovery. Cranes, like metal insects, picked at the carcasses of buildings. Decontamination crews in hazmat suits hosed away the last viscous residues of the consensus, which now smelled only of stale sugar and wet cement. Sirens were no longer wails of panic, but the bored beeps of utility vehicles. Order, that grayscale, crushing force, was reasserting itself with quiet efficiency. Deadpool moved through it like a phantom. They'd given him a standard-issue gray sweatsuit, scratchy and ill-fitting, after his own suit had been dissolved for the 17th time. No one stopped him. No one questioned him. The association's drones tracked his biosignature with a cold blue light, but no official approached. He was a deployed asset that had served its temporary purpose. Now he was in post-mission idle mode, awaiting further instructions or disposal. He was part of the scenery, a peculiar scarred tree in a deforested landscape. He found Saitama not through any heroic instinct or dramatic tracking, but because the man was, paradoxically, the most conspicuous absence of spectacle in the entire city. He was a still point in the turning world, a bald man in a cheap yellow jumpsuit and a white cape, sitting on a solitary, dusty rock on a barren hill that overlooked the ruin. He was eating from a cup of instant noodles, the steam curling in the evening air, his posture one of profound, unshakable boredom. He watched the monumental cleanup efforts below not with pride, relief, or sorrow, but with the dispassionate interest of a man watching a slightly tedious nature documentary about ant colonies. The urge to quip, to explode into a performance, to shatter that unbearable stillness with a cannonball of chaos surged in Deadpool's throat like bile. He could launch into a monologue about post-apocalyptic catering, about the aesthetic poverty of capes that didn't flutter dramatically, about the philosophical implications of instant noodles as a victory feast. He could shoot the cup out of his hand. He could do a song and dance number. The script wrote itself in screaming neon letters in his mind. He choked it down. It was the hardest thing he had ever done. Harder than regenerating a spine. The performance died before it was born, leaving a sick, hollow feeling in his gut. He approached slowly, the gravel crunching under his borrowed sneakers with a sound like breaking teeth. Saitama sipped his broth, a loud, mundane slurp. He didn't turn. The sound was so ordinary it was offensive. "You," Deadpool said. His voice was uncharacteristically flat, sandpaper on stone. All the theatrical cadence, the sing-song menace, the playful lilt, gone. "You're him, the guy, the top of the food chain, the final boss, the punchline." Saitama turned his head. His face was a masterpiece of benign emptiness. Not stoic, not brooding, just blank, like a cleared chalkboard. His eyes held no hidden depth, no flicker of cosmic power, no weariness from great burden. They were just eyes. "Oh," he said, the sound barely a syllable. "You're the new guy, the one who doesn't die. Genos mentioned you, said you were loud." Deadpool just stared. "That must be annoying," Saitama continued, turning back to his noodles and poking at a stubborn piece of dehydrated vegetable. "Annoying?" Deadpool parroted, the word tasting strange. "For you, I mean," Saitama clarified, as if it were obvious. "Must get boring, doing the same thing over and over." "Boring." Deadpool repeated the word like it was from a dead language. A fuse sputtered in the back of his skull. He took a step forward, his hands coming up, gesturing wildly at the panorama of destruction below them. The toppled towers, the streets scoured clean by a single, indifferent punch. "Boring? I just died 17 times in that soup down there. 17! I felt my eyeballs liquefy and drip down my cheekbones. I felt my tongue dissolve while I was trying to tell a joke about internal organs. I choked on my own regenerating lungs. And you call it boring?" Saitama took another sip, thoughtful. He swallowed. "I guess. Dying looks painful. I wouldn't like it." He said it with the same tone a person might use to discuss a disliked vegetable. "I wouldn't like Brussels sprouts." He went back to his noodles, his attention already fraying, drifting back to the ants moving steel below. The stillness around Saitama was absolute. It wasn't peace. It wasn't calm. It was the quiet of a vacuum, a perfect, soundless void where no vibration of emotion, no wave of humor, no shockwave of pain could travel. It was a null field. Deadpool's entire being, a roiling, screaming galaxy of traumatic memories, fourth wall fractures, chemical joy, and chronic pain, was a cacophony that slammed against that void and found no echo, no resistance, nothing. It just dissipated. He was screaming into a black hole. He felt smaller than he ever had, more insignificant than when facing a galaxy eater. At least a galaxy eater noticed you before it ate you. "Fight me," Deadpool said. The words came out not as a challenge, but as a plea. He drew a pistol from a hidden holster he'd regenerated under the sweatpants. It was a simple, unadorned 9mm, a tool for a simple request. Saitama looked at the gun, then at Deadpool's face. His expression shifted from blank to mildly perplexed, the first real emotion he'd shown. "Why?" "Because I need to know." Deadpool's voice cracked, the flatness splintering into something raw. "I need to see it. I need to feel it. I need something in this godforsaken, boring, literal-minded, humorless universe to react to me, to prove I'm here, that I matter, that any of this," he gestured at himself, his scars, his very existence, means something more than just a weird blob of data on a clipboard. Saitama tilted his head. The movement was so slight. "I'm reacting," he said, and it was the most terrifyingly honest thing Deadpool had ever heard. "I'm talking to you. This is a reaction." He wasn't being dismissive. He was stating a fact. In Saitama's world, this was a significant interaction, a conversation. This was engagement. It was the ultimate deconstruction. The fight wasn't worth having because the outcome was less than a foregone conclusion. It was irrelevant. A fight implied conflict, struggle, narrative. This was just an event that wouldn't be interesting. The last thread of Deadpool's restraint, the one holding back the tidal wave of performative insanity, snapped. But what came out wasn't manic glee. It was pure, undiluted rage, a rage with no joke to cushion it, no meta-commentary to deflect it. It was the rage of being fundamentally, ontologically ignored. With a scream that was all shredded vocal cords and zero humor, he emptied the clip. The gun roared, the sound absurdly loud in the hilltop quiet. Bang, 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 bang. The bullets traveled the short space between them. They struck Saitama directly in the center of his forehead, one after the other, in a tight grouping a master marksman would envy. They did not pierce. They did not ricochet with a spark. They simply stopped. They flattened against his skin, the lead deforming into perfect, tiny pancakes. And then they fell, one by one, to the dusty ground at his feet with soft, pathetic plinks, like lead confetti after the world's saddest parade. Saitama didn't flinch, he didn't blink, his head didn't even rock back a millimeter. He had finished his noodles during the gunfire. He now peered into the empty cup, looking for any remaining broth. The silence that followed was heavier than any death Deadpool had ever experienced. It was thicker than the acidic gel of the consensus, more absolute than the void between realities. It was the sound of absolute, utter, and complete futility. It was the universe itself shrugging. Plink. The last flattened bullet settled on the gravel. Deadpool's hands went numb. The pistol, now smoking and empty, dropped from his limp fingers, hitting the dirt with a thud. The performance was over. There was no audience, not even a critic. There was just a man who was bored, and a man who finally understood why. The wind picked up a dry, sighing breath that carried the twin smells of concrete dust and cheap, salty noodle broth. It tugged at Saitama's cape, which fluttered with a cheap polyester rustle. It blew through Deadpool's sweatsuit, chilling the sweat that had sprung from his pores. All the manic energy, the chaotic momentum that had propelled him through multiple universes and countless deaths, drained out of him. It didn't leak, it flooded, pouring out of his feet and into the unfeeling earth, leaving behind a cavernous, hollow ache. His shoulders slumped, not in defeat, but in a kind of total spiritual exhaustion. The cracks in his psyche yawned wide open, and from the depths, something quiet and dreadful looked out. He looked at the indifferent man before him, a man who embodied a power so absolute it had erased the very concept of struggle, and with it, the need for meaning, for narrative, for punchlines. The question that formed on Deadpool's lips had no setup. It had no comedic timing. It was bare, stripped, and utterly sincere. "What's the point?" Saitama looked up from his empty cup. He seemed to consider the question not as a philosophical quandary, but as a simple inquiry. He gazed out at the city, at the setting sun painting the wreckage in hues of orange and deep blue. "The point," Saitama began, his voice still that same infuriatingly calm monotone. He stood up, crumpling the noodle cup in his fist. He looked down at Deadpool, and for a fraction of a second, there might have been something in his eyes, not pity, not understanding, but a faint, distant recognition of the shape of a question he'd asked himself in a different way long ago. "The supermarket sale ends at 8, he said. "That's the point right now. I'm out of mayonnaise." He tossed the cup into a nearby half-crushed trash bin. It was a perfect shot. He began to walk away, down the hill toward the slowly healing city. "Wait," Deadpool said, the word a dry croak. The hollowness was being filled now not with madness, but with a terrifying crystal-clear clarity. A narrative was forming, dark and inevitable. "That's it? You just go buy groceries?" Saitama paused, not looking back. "Yeah, life's mostly groceries, and bills, and monsters, but those are quick." He started walking again. Deadpool watched him go, the yellow jumpsuit a spot of cheap color against the dusk. The answer wasn't a revelation, it was a void, and Deadpool felt himself tilting on the edge of it. He looked at his own hands, the hands that could heal from anything but this. He looked at the flattened bullets in the dust. He looked at the city saved by a man who found it less interesting than a discounted condiment. A slow, cold smile spread across his face, but it held no joy. It was the smile of a circuit closing, of a terrible, perfect joke finally being understood. The audience was absent. The critic was bored. The world was grayscale. So, if humor had no power here, perhaps it was time to speak this world's true native language. Cliffhanger. As Saitama's figure disappeared into the gathering twilight, Deadpool did not follow. He knelt in the dust and picked up one of the flattened bullets, its metal still warm. He held it up, examining its perfect, smooth deformity. The hollow ache inside him solidified into a cold, focused purpose. He turned his gaze not toward the city, but toward the distant, sleek spire of the Hero Association headquarters, glowing like a sterile beacon in the distance. A place of files, classifications, and cold, bureaucratic erasure. "Okay," he whispered to the empty hill, his voice now terrifyingly calm, all traces of the manic performer gone. "You don't want a jester? Fine. You want a threat?" An anomaly? He crushed the lead pancake in his fist. Let's see how your point holds up when someone starts erasing your lines from the script. He stood up, dusted off the gray sweatpants, and began walking, not toward the city of survivors, but toward the heart of the system that found him boring. The Merc with the mouth had been deconstructed. What was left was something far quieter and infinitely more dangerous. The laughter was gone. All that remained was the punch. The hilltop conversation didn't end. It simply failed to launch. The void of Saitama's indifference wasn't a wall to break against. It was a vacuum that sucked the very intention out of the air. Deadpool stood frozen long after the yellow speck had vanished into the city grid, the crushed bullet a cold, leaden weight in his palm. The clarity that had settled over him wasn't peaceful, it was surgical. A diagnosis for which there was no cure. He didn't follow Saitama to the supermarket. He turned and walked into the wilderness of the city's outskirts. A scarred man in a gray uniform moving through the twilight like a ghost. He walked all night, his mind not a circus of thoughts, but a single, silent, white room. By the time the sun rose, painting the industrial yards and training grounds on the edge of City Z in pale gold, he had found what he was looking for. A vast, cracked concrete expanse, a forgotten testing ground for long-dead projects. It was empty, silent, and utterly unimportant. The perfect stage for a final, pointless performance. He didn't know how he knew Saitama would come. Perhaps it was a hunch. Perhaps, in a universe this blandly narrative, the final boss always shows up for the climactic, futile battle. Or perhaps, on some level, Deadpool had finally tuned in to the dismal frequency of this world and understood its one rule. Overwhelming power is always, always nearby, especially when you don't want it to be. He spent the morning preparing, not laying traps. Traps were for enemies who acknowledged you as a threat. He gathered props. A pair of katanas, their blades notched from countless battles across realities. His pistols, freshly loaded. A rocket launcher, rusted but functional, looted from an abandoned association storage locker. A bandolier of grenades, their pins polished like jewelry. He wasn't arming himself for victory. He was curating exhibits for a one-man museum of violence that no one would visit. When the familiar, unimpressive figure in yellow appeared at the edge of the concrete field, ambling along as if on a dull Sunday stroll, Deadpool felt no surge of adrenaline, no flicker of fear, only a profound, weary certainty. Saitama stopped, noticing him. He didn't assume a stance. He put his hands in his pockets. "Oh, it's you again." Deadpool didn't wait for an answer, for a cue, for a punchline. He had run out of all of them. He simply unleashed. It was not an attack. It was an eruption, a geyser of pure, undirected violence. He moved with a lifetime's skill, every dirty trick, every acrobatic feat, every brutal martial arts technique forged in 100 wars across dimensions. But it was skill divorced from purpose. He wasn't trying to win. He wasn't trying to hurt. He was trying to inscribe. He fired the pistols while sprinting, the bullets weaving a tapestry of lead around Saitama's head, every shot aimed with impossible, suicidal precision. Saitama leaned slightly to the left to avoid one, tilted his head back for another. The motions so minimal they seemed like tricks of the light. The bullets whined off into the distance. Deadpool dropped the guns, drew the katanas, and became a whirlwind. He moved faster than he ever had, a red and gray blur of intersecting silver arcs. He employed a dozen fighting styles in as many seconds. The flowing grace of a samurai, the brutal efficiency of a mercenary, the chaotic unpredictability of a street brawler. The air hummed with the passage of his blades. Saitama dodged without seeming to move. He wasn't even looking at the swords. He was looking at Deadpool's feet, his shoulders, the micro-tremors that preceded each strike. A katana aimed at his neck was parried not with a blade, but with a single extended index finger. The ting was a high, pure, ridiculous sound. The shockwave of the parry traveled up the blade, vibrating through Deadpool's arms with tooth-rattling force, but the carbonadium held. "Just look at me!" Deadpool roared, the words tearing from a throat raw with dust and desperation. He discarded one katana, pulled a pin from a grenade with his teeth, and lobbed it not at Saitama, but at the ground between them, using the explosion as a screen. He erupted from the smoke and fire, the remaining blade a silver needle aimed at a seemingly open spot, Saitama's side. Saitama, who had been examining his fingernail, exhaled a small sigh. The sigh carried just enough force to alter the grenade's smoke pattern. His elbow came up, not in a block, but in a casual adjustment of his posture. The katana's tip touched the fabric of his jumpsuit and stopped, as if it had hit the event horizon of a black hole. The blade didn't bend. It just ceased to have forward momentum. Deadpool landed, panting, sweat and grit mixing on his skin. His mask had been torn by a fragment of his own grenade, a long rent down the side, revealing a strip of ravaged, cratered flesh, a landscape of old pain. He didn't try to hide it. He thrust his face forward, the ruined tissue and the one visible, bloodshot eye, a testament to 1,000 deaths. "See me!" The scream was stripped of all theatricality. It was the raw, primal sound of a consciousness demanding proof of its own existence from an indifferent cosmos. Saitama stopped. He did look. He turned his full, placid attention to Deadpool's face, to the heaving chest, to the trembling hands still clutching the useless sword. His eyes held no contempt, no anger, no pity, no fascination. Just a mild, profound boredom, tinged with the faintest hint of confusion, like a man trying to understand why a gnat is buzzing with such specific intensity. "I see you," Saitama said. His voice was calm, factual. "You're in pain, and you're really loud." The simplicity of it was the final, absolute blow. It wasn't an insult. It wasn't a dismissal. It was a neutral observation, as true and as impactful as noting the sky was blue. It acknowledged his suffering only to categorize it as an unpleasant noise. The performance had been reviewed by the universe's ultimate critic, and the review was audible. Something in Deadpool's mind, the last straining girder holding up the fragile architecture of his identity, sheared and gave way. There was no strategy left, no art, only a final, desperate, physical punctuation mark. With a wordless, guttural cry that was the death rattle of the Merc with the mouth, he abandoned all technique. He dropped the katana. He lunged, not with a fighter's grace, but with the clumsy, total commitment of a child throwing a tantrum. His hands curled into claws aimed for Saitama's face. One thumb, stretched out, aimed directly for Saitama's eye. The most basic, instinctive attack in the animal kingdom. A flinch, a blink, any reaction. Saitama, perhaps deciding this game had never begun and therefore couldn't be over. Perhaps just turning to leave because the concrete field was boring and he remembered he had laundry to do, moved. It wasn't a punch. There was no serious series, no named technique, no wind-up of cosmic significance. It was a casual, backhanded wave. the kind of motion one uses to shoo away a persistent insect without breaking stride. His open palm passed through the air in front of him. The universe along the path of that motion compressed. There was no sound, no flash of light. The air itself seemed to flinch, to solidify for a nanosecond into a pane of impossible density, then vanish. Deadpool didn't feel impact. He experienced uncreation. From the point of contact, his chest, outward, his body ceased to be matter. It did not explode. It did not burn. It disintegrated into its constituent atoms, and those atoms were then politely, utterly obliterated. Cell walls, DNA, the intricate scaffolding of his healing factor, all of it was unmade in a wave of pure applied pressure that recognized no difference between flesh, bone, Kevlar, or steel. He became a momentary, expanding cloud of red mist, a haze of what was once Wade Wilson. His consciousness, that stubborn, cursed fourth-wall adjacent spark, did not extinguish. How could it? It was a narrative artifact, a joke that had forgotten its setup. It had no physical location to be destroyed. It swirled in the sudden void, a point of awareness adrift in a sensory vacuum, screaming into a non-existent auditory cortex. Then, obeying the oldest, most fundamental law of his being, a law older than this universe, written by writers in another dimension, it began to pull. From the air, from the dust, from the quantum foam itself, molecules screamed into being. They were not his original molecules. Those were gone. These were new, assembled by a force that treated complete atomic annihilation as a minor inconvenience. They gathered, swarmed, knitted. Bone crystallized from nothing, nerves woven like lightning, muscle fiber spun itself into existence. Skin, pale and new, stretched over the horrifying sculpture. It took minutes, an eternity in the silent void of his mind. He lay in a shallow, smooth crater of his own making, the concrete beneath him fused to glass in a perfect shallow dish. He was naked, fully regenerated, physically whole. The sky above was a serene, indifferent blue. A bird chirped somewhere, a cheerful, mundane sound. In the far, far distance, a tiny yellow speck was just disappearing over a hill, walking home. Deadpool did not move. He stared at the sky. He could not die. That was the immutable fact of his existence. But Saitama's backhand had proven a more terrifying truth, that his inability to die did not confer meaning. It did not force recognition. It was not a power, nor even a curse any longer. It was an irrelevance. He had thrown his ultimate tantrum against the uncaring engine of reality. He had used every weapon, every skill, every ounce of his chaotic will. And the universe hadn't fought back. It hadn't even issued a response. It had simply continued its operations around him as a river flows around a particularly oddly shaped but ultimately unimportant rock. His immortality was the ultimate joke, and the punchline was that there was no one left, not even himself, to hear it. The laughter had died in the vacuum. Cliffhanger. He lay there as the sun arced across the sky. He lay there as it began to set, painting the glassy crater in hues of orange and purple. He lay there until the first stars, cold and distant, pricked through the velvet black. The chill of the concrete seeped into his new skin, but he didn't shiver. When he finally sat up, the movement was slow, mechanical. He looked at his hands, turning them over in the starlight. Unscarred, perfect, empty. He opened his mouth, a reflex, to say something. A quip about the weather. A curse at the heavens, a sob for everything he had lost, which he now realized was everything he had ever been. He shaped the words with his tongue, pushed air from his lungs. Nothing came out. Not a whisper, not a croak. He tried again. A grimace of effort twisted his new face. Silence. He clutched his throat, feeling the healthy muscles, the intact vocal cords. There was no physical damage. The silence was deeper than anatomy. It was existential. The part of him that spoke, that narrated, that quipped, that screamed, that connected him to the audience, to the narrative, to the very idea of being Wade Wilson, had been erased not by a fist, but by a truth it could not withstand. The Merc with the mouth had gone quiet. In the stillness of the night, under the uncaring stars, he slowly brought his hands up and covered the mask where his face would be. Not to hide, but to feel the silence against his palms. It was the only thing left that felt real. The story had ended. The page was blank. And for the first time in his endless, noisy life, Wade Wilson was alone with the sound of nothing at all. Time in a world of constant, scheduled catastrophe passed in a series of bullet points and incident reports. Weeks bled into a monotonous rhythm of sirens, silent violence, and sterile debriefings. The Hero Association, after extensive observation and data logging, arrived at their final classification for the anomaly formerly known as Deadpool. He was designated B-Class Persistent Anomaly number 1138, a number, a file code. He was not a person, nor a hero, nor a villain. He was a recurring event, like a peculiar weather pattern that happened to also dismember monsters. He was issued a standard-issue gray and black combat suit, devoid of pouches or personality. He performed his duties with a terrifying mechanical efficiency that was far more disturbing than his former chaotic flair. When a tiger-level threat, a swarm of crystalline parasites, infested the City Q subway, B-Class number 1138 was dispatched. He did not quip. He did not announce his presence. He simply descended into the tunnels and emerged 93 minutes later, covered in glittering insectoid ichor. His suit torn in 17 places, all of which had already healed beneath the fabric. The parasites were exterminated. 0 civilian casualties. His post-mission report, submitted via a silent datapad entry, was 3 words: targets eliminated. No chatter. The other heroes, especially those in B and C class who worked alongside him, found this new version profoundly unnerving. The jokes had been annoying, confusing, offensive, but the silence was wrong. It was a black hole where a supernova of nonsense used to be. They could deal with a loudmouth. They didn't know how to deal with a void that fought with the precision of a scalpel and the endurance of a tectonic plate. He moved through the ranks like a ghost, his eyes visible through the lenses of a plain black mask that had replaced his familiar red one, scanning everything and registering nothing. He watched the world now, not as a participant, but as an archivist of absurdity. He saw Genos, the demon cyborg, training with a fiery, desperate intensity, his entire being a scream of ambition and unresolved trauma aimed at a distant, unattainable strength. A character with a tragic past and a clear, driving goal. He saw King, the fraudulent S-Class, his video game heart pounding a war drum of terror in his chest as he bluffed his way through crises, a character defined by a lie so immense it had become its own kind of truth. He watched Metal Bat, a kid fueled by an ever-burning, simplistic fury, finding meaning in the sheer act of resistance. He observed Tatsumaki, the tornado of terror, wielding godlike power with the petulant, damaged ego of a scorned child. Her story one of twisted protection and profound isolation. They were all, in their own broken, dramatic ways, characters. They had arcs, motivations, themes. They fought for revenge, for recognition, for justice, for family, for the sheer, stupid thrill of it. They generated narrative gravity. Deadpool, B-Class number 1138, generated paperwork. He was a footnote in the association's logs, a typo that the universe kept autocorrecting back onto the page, unable to delete him, but refusing to integrate him into the sentence. He was the misplaced semicolon in the epic poem of this world. One evening, his patrol route, assigned, not chosen, took him to the roof of a high-rise in a quiet district of City Z. The sky was deepening into twilight, the first brave stars challenging the neon glow of the city below. In his gloved hand, he turned over a small, crystalline device. It was not of this world. He had found it 3 days prior in the vaporized ruins of a lab belonging to a monster obsessed with dimensional harmonics. It was cold and hummed with a barely perceptible frequency. Its purpose was clear from the alien schematics half destroyed beside it: a single-use, localized, dimensional rift generator. A door. A ticket back to a universe where chimichanga references were understood, where breaking the fourth wall was a superpower, not a symptom, where his pain was met with either horrified recoil or raucous laughter, but was acknowledged, where his immortality made him a wild card, a legend, a nightmare, a star. A universe with a sense of humor, however dark. A universe that made sense for Wade Wilson. He held his escape in his palm. As he looked out, his gaze drifted downward, drawn by the familiar, mundane sound of complaining. In a narrow alley below, between a discount grocery and a shuttered laundromat, a scene played out. A giant, talking crab monster, its shell the color of boiled lobster, was waving its claws menacingly at a bald man in a yellow jumpsuit. "And the price of crab sticks at the convenience store is an outrage," the Crab Emperor screeched, its voice a bubbly parody of rage. "A monument to capitalist exploitation of crustacean kind. I shall usher in a new era where the shellfish are the consumers, starting with your total disintegration." Saitama stood, a plastic bag in one hand, listening. His face was the same canvas of benign emptiness. He wasn't poised for battle. He was waiting for the monster to finish its monologue so he could proceed with his evening. The Crab Emperor lunged, a claw large enough to snip a car in half, snapping forward with surprising speed. Saitama flicked his index finger. It was the most minor of gestures, a dismissive tap against the leading edge of the claw. The result was not a defeat, it was a transformation. The shockwave traveled through the crab's entire body in an instant, vibrating at a specific, perfect frequency. There was no explosion of chitin. Instead, the Crab Emperor instantly ceased to be a monster and became food. Its body cooked perfectly in its own shell, turning a brilliant, steaming red. It toppled over with a gentle thump, releasing a cloud of savory, buttery-smelling steam. Saitama blinked. He leaned over, sniffed the air. He reached down and, with a crisp crack, broke off one of the giant cooked claws. He examined it, gave a small, non-committal, "Huh," and tucked it under his arm alongside his grocery bag. He then walked out of the alley, his expression one of mild, mundane disappointment, as if the real tragedy wasn't the attempted takeover, but the fact this wouldn't count toward his grocery budget. Deadpool watched from the rooftop, the cold device biting into his palm. He had just witnessed the ultimate power in the universe, a power that could unmake galaxies, a power that had erased him, deployed to solve a minor inconvenience about snack prices. And then that power had walked away. His life, his mood, his very being utterly, completely unchanged. The cataclysmic battle, the existential crisis on the hill, the 17 deaths, the final soul-crushing silence. All of it had been less than a subplot to Saitama. It was a commercial break he hadn't even watched. A fly that had buzzed for a moment and then stopped. He looked at the shimmering device. The rift it could open glimmered in his mind's eye. A doorway back to madness that made sense, to warped friendships with Spider-Man and metal-suited playboys, to enemies who monologued, to a narrative that embraced its own absurdity. He could step through. He could be the Merc with the mouth again. He could make them laugh, make them scream, make them look. His thumb found the activation node. With a soft, whispering hum, the device came to life. The air beside him on the windy rooftop sea lay, not with the chaotic scream of his original arrival, but with a clean, almost clinical tear. A shimmering, silent rift opened, a vertical pool of swirling, impossible colors, the violent purples and electric greens of his home universe's chaos magic. Through it, he could hear a faint, distant echo, the sound of traffic horns, a snippet of a pop song, the crinkle of a chimichanga wrapper. It smelled of gasoline, cheeseburgers, and existential drama. It was his door, his escape hatch from grayscale meaninglessness. He took a final, long look at the world below, at City Z with its brutalist association towers and its crumbling apartment blocks, at a world where power was a binary. You had the punch or you didn't, where heroism was a job with a ranking system, where monsters were a daily nuisance and a bald man in cheap clothing was God. A world that was brutal, honest, absurd, and yet, in its own way, deeply, tragically serious. A world that had no need for his brand of meta-madness. A world that had, through its sheer, overwhelming indifference, performed the one act of violence he could not heal from. It had forced him to look at the man beneath the mask without any filter, any punchline, any fourth wall to hide behind. It had shown him Wade Wilson stripped bare. Not a hilarious anti-hero, but a core of endless pain, profound loneliness, and a desperate, screaming need to be seen that was, in the end, just really loud. And it was the only honest reflection he'd ever had. With a slow, deliberate motion that held more finality than any of his deaths, he clenched his fist. The crystalline device, the last tether to his old story, shattered. It didn't explode, it imploded into a handful of inert, gray dust that the wind snatched from his grasp instantly. The shimmering rift gave one last silent pulse, like a dying heartbeat, and winked out of existence. The rooftop was just a rooftop again. The wind was just the wind. He wasn't staying because he mattered here. He had proven beyond all doubt that he did not. He was staying because here, in this world of absolute power and stratified meaning, his lack of mattering was the one unshakable, undeniable truth. It was the baseline, the 0 point. In a universe of ridiculous gods and striving mortals, he had finally found the one role he couldn't writer's room his way out of, couldn't break the fourth wall to escape. He was a background character, an extra in the epic, the man perpetually in the periphery of the shot, healing from wounds no one noticed him taking. He reached up and pulled the plain black mask fully over his face, the act feeling not like donning a costume, but like lowering a shroud. Down in the street, life went on. A car backfired. A couple argued. A neon sign flickered. Somewhere, a disaster was brewing, a hero was training, a monster was evolving. And Saitama was probably looking at his utility bill, mildly annoyed. Disasters would happen. Heroes would strive, their stories full of sound and fury. Saitama would end them with a single board punch. And Deadpool, no, B-class persistent anomaly number 1138, would be there. In the rubble, in the chaos, in the aftermath. Silent, watching, healing, a fixture, a fact. A man who could not leave the page. Final monologue, voiceover, quiet, flat, no music. They say if a tree falls in a forest and no one hears it, it doesn't make a sound. What if a man spends his whole life screaming jokes into the void, and the void just stares back? You can't be the class clown when the whole universe is the straight man. The ultimate straight man, one who doesn't even get the joke. So you stop. You just stop. The pain doesn't stop. The healing doesn't stop. The fighting, that doesn't stop either. It just becomes what you do instead of who you are. But the noise stops. And in the quiet, you hear everything else. You hear the grind of the machine. You hear the tiny, desperate stories everyone else is telling themselves. You hear the silence at the center of the one punch that ends everything. You realize you were never the hero. You weren't the villain. Hell, you weren't even the comic relief. Not here. You're just the man who can't leave the page, the ink that won't dry, the typo that persists. So you watch, you fight, you heal, and you learn to live with the quiet.